two mere mortals almost agreed to eliminate nuclear weapons from the face of the planet. However, Reagan was attached to his Star Wars concept. Gorbachev wouldn't accept it, and they parted. And if you remember seeing George Shultz after that momentous historical event, he was absolutely shattered. He said, we did this, and then we reached this, and incidentally, the Americans came with no facts or figures, no plans, but the Russians were very well prepared. So here's Reagan and Gorbachev downstairs. It was a tiny house. Upstairs in the bathroom, sitting on the lavatory with a board over the bath, was Richard Pearl. And Richard Pearl was doing all the numbers and trying to work out what they were going to do. And in the basement were the KGB, protecting Gorbachev, but they got a bit drunk on vodka, and they tossed a lighted match into the waste paper basket and caught fire, and they nearly burnt the whole place down. I went there and I was told this by the Icelanders. So Schultz was excited. You could see his body language. We did this, and then we did this, and at the end his face just fell, and he said, but it didn't come to any conclusion. And that gave a vision of what we could do. And when people say we can't get rid of nuclear weapons, that's a ridiculous statement, because we almost did.
This is the Ranger uranium mine, smack in the middle of Kakadu, a World Heritage listing. Every year, 5,000 tonnes of yellow cake are exported from this mine. Our politicians tell us it's just for peaceful purposes, nuclear power. But yellow cake carries no name tag, only a price tag.
The open pit mine is a greater hazard for the people in the vicinity, because the face of the ore bed is opened, and there are many surfaces for release of the radon gas, which carries the radioactivity off-site.
If you swallow or inhale radium or radon, or there are many other elements that are radioactive, they locate specifically maybe in the lung, like radon, and just irradiate a tiny volume of cells that gets a really high dose. And the cells close by die. The ones on the periphery of that volume survive, and they can be mutated to get cancer.
The tailings dump at Ranger uranium mine. Looks like any other slag heap you'd expect to get with a mine, doesn't it? But in fact, it's a time bomb. What the mining companies don't bother to tell the general public, and the pollies don't care to know, is that in fact 80% of the original radioactivity, which was once cocooned safely in nature and out of harm's way, deep in the earth, has now been brought to the surface of the earth and crushed into powder-sized particles to extract the valuable minerals. Eventually, years from now, these radioactive tailings will be dumped back into the huge crater and grassed over. But in the meantime, the dust from these finely pulverized radioactive tailings is free to blow in the wind. It's just 550 kilometres south to Adelaide from Olympic Dam, 1,000 kilometres to downtown Melbourne, and 1,650 kilometres to Sydney, as the wind blows.
Sydney-siders woke to find their Emerald City had turned an eerie burnt orange. Through there somewhere is the Opera House.
The view was spectacular, but it was also hazardous to health.
But pollution was the highest that it has ever been recorded. Millions of tonnes of outback dust that blocked out the sun, clogged our lungs and turned Sydney into the red centre.
Miners at BHP Billiton's Olympic Dam or Rio Tinto's Ranger Mine must sign a non-disclosure clause when they start work. They undertake not to speak about anything they've seen or heard while working at the mine. This draconian practice applies long after the workers have left the mine. We heard plenty of horror stories of uranium spills at Ranger and Olympic Dam, but workers, with few exceptions, were too intimidated to speak on the record.
A number of years ago, somehow the companies managed to get the water supplies mixed up. The uranium-contaminated water's coming into the drinking supply, into the showers. People are showering in it, people are drinking it. 400 times the daily exposure limits that are recommended in government guidelines. And how would you feel if you were covered in that water in a shower? How would you feel if you've drunk that water?
Look, I don't know all the details of that, but I do understand that as a consequence of that, there was considerable assistance, as would normally be the case, given to those workers, and continues to do, and it continues to be given. But if you want more information about that, you will have to talk to the company about that.
Someone had left a hose on and uranium got all wet, and when it hit the drums, it just squashed the drums. And when I walked over to the area, I was talking to one of the co-workers, and I said, what it's like, and he said, it's not good. As I went in, there was dry uranium all over the ground, falling off their boots, clothing, overalls, all on the ground. Just like dust, you walk through it, you kick it up, you're going to breathe it in. So guys weren't thinking about cleaning that up. So I called up the supervisor, closed the area down and hosed it all up, cleaned the area up. To them it's, you know, production. Get the job done, let's get back online and get going.
How you can just pass the buck, move offshore and make your millions and walk away without any conscience whatsoever. They just have no conscience. Not one of these people have ever said they were sorry for what they did.
In the lead up to the first Gulf War, the US government's Department of Energy found a unique way to deal with its mounting nuclear waste problem. Give it away free to the arms manufacturers. And make money from it, exporting these depleted uranium weapons to 29 foreign armies. The United States is Australia's largest customer for our uranium, so it is inevitable that it's our yellow cake that is ending up on distant battlefields as depleted uranium.
What we're seeing now in Gulf War veterans and Iraqis from Gulf War I is horrendous birth defects, which are increasing, and they're even worse. The kind of birth defects. Babies are being born now in Iraq that are just pieces of flesh. They have no head, they have no limbs. I don't even know what they are.
Thousands of tons of depleted uranium has now been dumped on Iraq, Afghanistan and the Balkans.
How do you think that the history of the peace movement has impacted the nuclear industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, I led the peace movement in America in the 80s, the nuclear weapons freeze movement, and when I first moved there in 1978, almost every American I spoke to said it's better to be dead than red. I said, what do you mean, you'd rather be blown up in a nuclear war? Oh yeah, we don't want to be communists. Then I founded and set up Physicians for Social Responsibility, and I and others recruited 23,000 doctors to this organisation. We happened to put an ad in the New England Journal of Medicine about the medical dangers of nuclear power the day after 3 Mile Island melted down. It was just serendipity. We got 500 new members like that, so it grew like topsy. And in 5 years we had symposia in all the major cities about the medical implications of nuclear war, and the media were fascinated. They said, what are doctors talking about nuclear war for? And in 5 years, 80% of Americans were opposed to nuclear war. Now that was the Second American Revolution. It was educational, peaceful, sagacious. It was a Gandhian revolution. And from that, and I met with Reagan in the White House, and although he was a dopey old man, he was nice. His IQ is about 100. He knew nothing.
about nuclear weapons. He did, after that interview or dialogue with me, you know, I was alone with him except for his daughter, start saying nuclear war must never be fought and can never be won. And then he started working with Gorbachev, who also was briefed by us, the physicians. So an end to the Cold War was brought about, I think largely through our work, number one. Number two, people say to me, and how do you know if it's true or not, but that if it wasn't for me and the work I did, you know, I might have stopped a nuclear war in the 80s, because things were very belligerent then, and Reagan was talking about, you know, blowing up Russia and the like. It was really scary. People were pretty terrified. But how, through the retrospectoscope, how do you know what your influence has been at all? But I do know that the worldwide anti-nuclear weapons movement in the 80s was extremely influential. And then Bush the first got elected, George the First. He eliminated a few nuclear weapons to help Gorbachev and Yeltsin. But then Clinton got in, who was absolutely gutless. As Keating would say, call him old jellyback. He had no spine. He didn't take on the Pentagon. And we handed him the method to abolish nuclear weapons on a silver plate. He had a compliant, alcoholic president in Russia called Yeltsin. He could have written an agreement which called for the abolition of nuclear weapons in 5 years between Russia and America. Their relationship was good. Could have got on Air Force One, flown over and said, "Here, Boris, sign this," and Boris would have. So the fact that we're all now, and of course when George II got in, it was absolutely hopeless, and he allowed the weaponisation of space. So the legacy that Clinton left was that we could still be blown apart by nuclear weapons and nuclear war. That's his legacy. And for that, I have to tell you, I sincerely resent him. He could have abolished nuclear weapons. We gave it to him on a silver platter, and he didn't do it. I mean, this is the history of the world, isn't it? Stupid politicians get into situations they don't understand or can't control, or have no courage or leadership or vision. There are a few Gandhis, there are a few FDR, Roosevelts, there aren't many really, few Chifleys. Anyway, that's my huge regret, that we actually set up a situation in the 80s and the 90s where we could have abolished nuclear weapons. Because we ended the Cold War and there were no impediments to do that. And now it's all going out of control. I am interested in writing another book, and it's going to be called Why Men Kill, because I don't understand it, and it's sort of puzzled me and fascinated me for years, and I'm going to dedicate it to Donald Rumsfeld, because I think he's a sociopath, and sociopaths tend to rise to the top like cream in corporations, in universities, in the Pentagon, you know, in government, in politics. So I want to explore that. There's a lot of new work done on hormone receptors in the brain, male and female, how it influences human behaviour, and I want to do a bit of psychology a la Jung and all sorts of things. So that'll be interesting. I'm going to America in May to speak again at various places and do grand rounds in the Children's Hospital in New Jersey. So and recently I put an ad in the Australian Medical Journal on the medical dangers of nuclear power, which is the original ad I had put in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1979.